There are moments in life that split your world into before and after. Moments so shocking, so utterly unexpected, that they leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. What happened to me last Sunday was one of those moments, and I'm still trying to process how a day that started with such hope and excitement could end with me crying alone in my car, feeling more humiliated than I'd ever felt in my 63 years of life. It was supposed to be the perfect Sunday. My daughter Emma had invited me over for lunch at her new house, the beautiful colonial she and her husband Marcus had just bought, in one of those pristine suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it belongs in a magazine. I'd been looking forward to this for weeks, not just because I loved spending time with Emma and my precious 3-year-old grandson Tyler, but because I was finally going to get to know Marcus better. You see, Emma and Marcus had been together for 5 years, married for 2, but I'd never really had the chance to connect with him. He was always polite enough during our brief encounters at family gatherings, but there was something distant about him, something that made me feel like I was being kept at arm's length. Emma always made excuses for him. He's shy, he's stressed from work, he's not used to big families, and I believed her because I wanted to. I wanted to believe that my daughter had married a good man who would love and protect her the way she deserved. That Sunday morning I woke up with butterflies in my stomach, the good kind. I'd spent the entire Saturday preparing. I went to the farmer's market early to pick up fresh flowers, sunflowers and daisies, Emma's favorites since she was little. I also bought a beautiful wooden toy train for Tyler, hand-carved by a local artisan, and I'd even baked Emma's favorite lemon bars from scratch, using my mother's recipe that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in our family. I remember standing in front of my closet that morning, trying to decide what to wear. I wanted to look nice, but not overdressed, approachable, but still put together. I finally settled on a soft blue cardigan that Emma had complimented before, paired with comfortable dark jeans and my favorite pearl necklace, the one my late husband had given me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to make a good impression, to show Marcus that I was someone worth knowing, worth including in their family circle. The drive to their house was pleasant. It was one of those crisp autumn days where the leaves were just starting to change color, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. I had the radio playing softly, humming along to old songs that reminded me of happier times. I practiced conversation starters in my head, questions about Marcus's work in finance, compliments about their beautiful new home, stories about Tyler that might make him laugh. I was genuinely excited to finally bridge the gap that had always seemed to exist between us. When I pulled into their driveway, I was struck again by how beautiful their house was. The red brick facade gleamed in the afternoon sun, the perfectly manicured lawn stretched out like a green carpet, and the large oak tree in the front yard was already dropping its first autumn leaf. This was the kind of house Emma had dreamed about since she was a little girl, and seeing her living in it filled my heart with such pride and joy. Emma answered the door with Tyler on her hip, and my heart immediately lifted. She looked radiant in a cream-colored sweater and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow looked effortlessly elegant. Tyler, my beautiful grandson, with his father's dark eyes and Emma's infectious smile, reached out for me immediately. "Grandma, Grandma," he squealed, and I felt that familiar rush of overwhelming love that only grandchildren can inspire. I set down my bags and gathered him into my arms, breathing in that unique scent of childhood, a mixture of baby shampoo, goldfish crackers, and pure innocence. "Hello, my sweet boy," I whispered into his hair. "Grandma missed you so much." Emma hugged me tight, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. "Mom, I'm so glad you're here. The house feels more like home when you're in it." Those words meant everything to me. Since Emma's father died 3 years ago, I'd been struggling with loneliness in ways I'd never experienced before. Emma was my only child, and Tyler was my only grandchild. They were my world, my reason for getting up in the morning, my source of joy and purpose. Being welcomed into their home with such warmth felt like coming home myself. We walked through the foyer, and I couldn't help but admire how beautifully Emma had decorated. The hardwood floors gleamed, and she'd hung family photos along the staircase, pictures of her and Marcus's wedding, Tyler's first steps, holidays, and milestones. It was exactly the kind of loving family home I'd always hoped she'd have. "Marcus is in the kitchen finishing up the roast," Emma said, leading me toward the back of the house. "He's been cooking all morning. I think he's really excited to have you over." My heart swelled with hope. Maybe today would be the day we finally connected. Maybe I'd been wrong about the distance I'd felt from him. Maybe he'd just been waiting for the right opportunity to let me in. The kitchen was stunning, all white cabinets, granite countertops, and stainless steel appliances. It was the kind of kitchen you'd see in home improvement magazines, spacious and bright, with a large island in the center. Marcus stood at the stove, wearing a navy blue polo shirt and khakis, his dark hair perfectly styled, even while cooking. He looked up when we entered, and I smiled warmly, ready to start fresh. "Hello, Marcus," I said, approaching with my arms slightly extended, hoping for a hug, or at least a warm greeting. "Thank you so much for having me over. The house is absolutely beautiful." He nodded curtly, not moving from his position at the stove. "Hi, Linda. Thanks for coming." The response was polite but cold, lacking any real warmth or enthusiasm. I felt a familiar pang of disappointment, but pushed it aside. Maybe he was just focused on the cooking. I decided to try again. "It smells absolutely wonderful in here," I said, moving closer to see what he was preparing. "Is there anything I can help you with?" "No, I've got it handled," he replied without looking at me, stirring something in a pot with more force than seemed necessary. The rejection stung, but I told myself not to take it personally. Some people just weren't comfortable with help in the kitchen. Emma was bustling around, setting the table in the adjacent dining room, and Tyler was playing with his blocks on the kitchen floor. The scene should have been picture perfect, but I could feel an underlying tension that I couldn't quite place. I decided to try a different approach. "Tyler, sweetheart, Grandma brought you something special," I said, kneeling down to his level and pulling out the wooden train I'd bought. His face lit up with pure joy, and he immediately began making train sounds as he pushed it across the floor. "What do you say to Grandma?" Emma prompted gently. "Thank you, Grandma," Tyler said, giving me a quick hug before returning to his new toy. I also handed Emma the lemon bars I'd made, and her face brightened. "Mom, you didn't have to do this. You know how much I love these." "I wanted to contribute something," I said. "I know how much work goes into hosting, and I didn't want to come empty-handed." That's when Marcus finally turned around, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. It wasn't irritation or stress from cooking. It was something colder, more calculating. He looked at the container of lemon bars in Emma's hands, then at me, and I could practically see the wheel turning in his head. "Actually, Linda," he said, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, "since you're so eager to help, maybe you could take your things and eat in the kitchen. We're planning to have a more intimate family dinner in the dining room today." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't process what he'd just said. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Tyler's train rolling across the floor. Emma had gone completely still, the container of lemon bars frozen in her hands. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned back to the stove, as if he hadn't just delivered the most humiliating statement I'd ever heard. "You can eat in here, in the kitchen, like the help does. That way you won't be in the way of our family time." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Like the help, like a maid. The man my daughter married, the father of my grandson, had just told me to eat in the kitchen like hired help. I felt my face flush with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and growing anger. Emma's voice cut through the silence, sharp and disbelieving. "Marcus, what did you just say?" The silence that followed Marcus's words was deafening. I stood there in their beautiful kitchen, my hands trembling slightly, as the full weight of what had just happened began to sink in. Tyler continued playing with his train, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around him, his innocent giggle providing a stark contrast to the tension that had suddenly filled the room. Emma set the container of lemon bars down on the counter with a sharp thud that seemed to echo through the space. Her face had gone pale, and I could see the shock and disbelief written across her features. She looked at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time, like the man she'd married had just revealed himself to be a stranger. "Marcus," she said again, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Did you just tell my mother to eat in the kitchen like the help?" Marcus didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, he turned around fully, crossing his arms over his chest, in a defensive posture that I recognized as someone preparing for a fight. The man I'd been trying so hard to connect with, the man I'd hoped would become like a son to me, looked me directly in the eye with a coldness that made my blood run cold. "I'm just being practical, Emma," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "This is our home, and we should be able to enjoy our Sunday dinner as a family without having to entertain your mother. She can eat in here, clean up after after herself and then leave. It's better for everyone. I felt like I'd been slapped across the face. The casual cruelty of his words, the matter-of-fact way he dismissed me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience, left me speechless. This wasn't about being practical. This was about power, about putting me in my place, about making it crystal clear that I wasn't welcome in their home or their life. Entertain me? I finally found my voice, though it came out shakier than I would have liked. Marcus, I'm not a stranger. I'm Emma's mother. I'm Tyler's grandmother. I'm family. He let out a short, harsh laugh that sent chills down my spine. Are you, though? Because from where I'm standing, you're a woman who shows up here uninvited, expecting to be waited on and catered to, bringing homemade desserts like some kind of desperate attempt to buy our affection. Each word was like a dagger to my heart. Uninvited. Emma had invited me herself, had called me 3 times this week to confirm the time and ask what I'd like to eat, expecting to be waited on. I'd offered to help multiple times and had been rebuffed. Desperate attempt to buy affection? I'd been baking for my daughter since she was old enough to stand on a chair and help me measure flour. Emma's face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. Marcus, stop. Just stop talking right now. But he was on a roll, and I realized with growing horror that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a stress-induced outburst. This was Marcus finally showing his true colors, saying things he'd probably been thinking for years but had been too calculating to voice until now. No, Emma, I'm tired of pretending, he continued, his voice growing more heated. I'm tired of your mother treating our home like it's hers, acting like she has some kind of right to be here whenever she wants. This is our house, our family, our life. She's not part of it. The words hit me like physical blows. I thought about all the times I'd held back from calling Emma because I didn't want to be a burden, all the times I'd shortened my visits because I sensed Marcus's discomfort, all the times I'd bitten my tongue when I disagreed with something he said or did because I wanted to keep the peace. I'd been walking on eggshells around this man for 5 years, and it had never been enough. Tyler had stopped playing with his train and was looking up at the adults with confused, worried eyes. Children always sense when something is wrong, even when they don't understand the specifics. I forced myself to smile at him, not wanting him to be frightened by the tension in the room. Marcus, Emma said, her voice low and dangerous, you're completely out of line. He turned his attention to her, and I saw something in his expression that made my maternal instincts scream with alarm. It was the look of a man who was used to getting his way, who didn't like being challenged, especially not by his wife. I'm out of line, he said, his voice rising slightly. I work 60 hours a week to pay for this house, this lifestyle, everything you and Tyler have. I think I have the right to decide who eats at my dining room table. Our dining room table, Emma corrected firmly, and my mother has every right to eat there. She's not some random guest, Marcus. She's family. She's your family, he shot back. Not mine. I never asked for a meddling mother-in-law who thinks she can waltz in here whenever she wants and take over. Meddling? I thought back over every interaction I'd had with Marcus, every conversation, every visit. I'd been nothing but respectful and polite. I'd never offered unsolicited advice, never criticized their parenting or their choices, never overstepped any boundary. The accusation was so unfair, so completely unfounded that it took my breath away. I have never meddled in your life, Marcus, I said, my voice stronger now as anger began to override the shock. I've been nothing but respectful to you, even when you've made it clear that you don't want me around. Respectful? He laughed again, that same cold, harsh sound. You call it respectful to show up here with your little gifts and your fake smiles, trying to worm your way into our lives? You're pathetic, Linda. A lonely old woman who can't accept that her daughter has moved on and doesn't need her anymore. The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. But the pain was overwhelming, not just from his words, but from the realization that this was how he'd seen me all along. Every smile I had given him, every attempt at conversation, every gesture of kindness had been twisted in his mind into something pathetic and desperate. Emma stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. That's enough, Marcus. You don't get to talk to my mother that way. I'll talk to her however I want in my own house, he snapped back. And if you don't like it, maybe you should think about where your loyalties lie. The threat was implicit implicit but clear. Choose him or choose me. It was the kind of emotional manipulation that abusive partners use to isolate their victims from their support systems. I'd read about it, seen it in movies and books, but I'd never imagined it happening to my own daughter. I looked at Emma, really looked at her, and saw something that broke my heart. She was scared, not just angry or upset, but genuinely frightened of her husband's reaction. How long had she been walking on eggshells around him? How many times had she had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for what was right? Emma, I said softly, you don't have to choose. I'll go. No, she said firmly, turning to face me. You're not going anywhere, Mom. This is unacceptable. But Marcus wasn't done. He moved closer to me, and I instinctively took a step back. There was something threatening about his posture, something that made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. Yes, you will go, he said, his voice low and menacing, and you'll think twice before coming back here and disrupting our family again. Emma doesn't need you anymore, Linda. She has me, she has Tyler, she has a real life. You're just a reminder of the past that she's trying to move on from. I felt something break inside me, not just my heart, but something deeper, my sense of self-worth, my belief in family, my faith in the goodness of people. This man who I'd tried so hard to love and accept had just told me that I was nothing more than an unwanted relic, a burden that my daughter needed to shed. Tyler started crying, overwhelmed by the raised voices and the tension in the room. Emma immediately went to him, scooping him up in her arms and whispering soothing words. But I could see the tears in her eyes, the way her hands shook as she held her son. I think, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos in my heart, that I should leave. Mom, no, Emma said, but I could hear the defeat in her voice. She was caught between two impossible choices, and I couldn't bear to be the cause of her pain. I gathered my purse and the flowers I'd brought, walking toward the door on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. As I reached the foyer, I turned back to see Marcus watching me with a satisfied smirk on his face. He'd won, and he knew it. Emma, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I love you. I love Tyler, and I'm always here if you need me. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now, but she didn't follow me to the door. She couldn't, and we both knew it. The drive home was a blur of tears and disbelief. I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see through my tears clearly enough to drive safely. Each time I stopped, I sat in my car in some random parking lot, sobbing until my chest hurt, trying to process what had just happened. The man my daughter married, the father of my grandson, had treated me like I was nothing more than an unwanted pest to be exterminated. But it wasn't just the humiliation that devastated me. It was the realization that this probably wasn't the first time Marcus had shown his true colors. The fear I'd seen in Emma's eyes, the way she'd hesitated before defending me, the careful way she'd always navigated conversations about Marcus. It all made sense now. My daughter was living with a man who thought it was acceptable to treat people with such cruelty, and she was too scared or too trapped to do anything about it. When I finally made it home, I went straight to my bedroom and collapsed on the bed, still wearing my blue cardigan and pearl, the same outfit I'd chosen so carefully that morning, hoping to make a good impression on my son-in-law. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent so much time and energy trying to win over a man who had never had any intention of accepting me into his family. I lay there for hours, replaying every moment from the afternoon. Marcus's cold dismissal when I'd offered to help, the calculating look in his eyes when he'd seen Emma's reaction to my lemon bar, the way he'd delivered his crushing verdict with such casual cruelty, the satisfied smirk on his face when I'd left. Every detail was burned into my memory, and I knew I'd be reliving this nightmare for a long time to come. My phone buzzed around 6 o'clock. It was a text from Emma. Mom, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, my heart breaking all over again. My poor daughter, caught between her husband's cruelty and her love for me. I could picture her waiting until Marcus was out of the room, typing quickly before he could see what she was doing. The thought of her having to sneak around just to comfort her own mother made me feel sick. I texted back, I'm okay, sweetheart. Don't worry about me. Just take care of yourself and Tyler. She responded immediately. Can you come over tomorrow when he's at work? We need to talk about this. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to rush over there and have a real conversation with my daughter about what had happened, about the man she'd married, about the life she was living. But I also knew that Marcus would probably find out about it somehow, and I couldn't bear the thought of causing Emma more problems. "Let me think about it," I replied. "I love you. I love you too, Mom. So much." That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about Tyler, my sweet, innocent grandson, who was growing up in a house where his father thought it was acceptable to treat his grandmother like hired help. What kind of values was he learning? What kind of man would he become if he grew up watching his father treat women with such disrespect? I also thought about Emma, about the signs I'd missed or chosen to ignore, the way she'd become quieter over the past few years, more withdrawn, the way she'd stopped sharing details about her marriage, always deflecting my questions with vague responses about how everything was fine, the way she'd started apologizing for Marcus's behavior, making excuses for his rudeness and distance. I'd thought I was being supportive by not pushing, by respecting their privacy, by giving them space to build their own life together. But now I wondered if I'd been enabling him by not speaking up when he was dismissive or rude. Had my silence been interpreted as weakness? Had it encouraged him to escalate his behavior? The next morning I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The initial shock and devastation had given way to something else, a quiet, burning anger that was more focused and determined than anything I'd felt in years. Marcus might have succeeded in humiliating me, but he'd also shown me exactly who he was, and now that I knew, I could start planning how to respond. I called my sister Margaret, who lived 3 states away, but had always been my closest confidant. I told her everything, from the moment I'd arrived at Emma's house to the cruel words Marcus had used to send me away. Margaret listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Linda," she finally said, her voice tight with anger, "that man is abusive. What he did to you was psychological abuse, and I guarantee you it's not the first time he's done something like this to Emma." Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way that my own thoughts hadn't. Marcus was abusive. The word sent a chill down my spine, but it also provided a framework for understanding what had happened. This wasn't just about a difficult son-in-law or family tension. This was about a man who used cruelty and humiliation as tools of control. "What do I do?" I asked Margaret. "I can't just abandon Emma, but I also can't subject myself to that kind of treatment again." "You document everything," she said firmly. "You write down exactly what happened, with dates and time. You save Emma's text messages. You start building a record of his behavior, and then you find a way to let Emma know that you're there for her when she's ready to leave him." "Oh, what if she's not ready? What if she never leaves him?" "Then you love her from a distance, and you make sure she knows that door is always open. But Linda, you can't sacrifice your own mental health trying to save someone who isn't ready to be saved." After I hung up with Margaret, I sat down at my kitchen table and started writing. I wrote down every detail I could remember from the previous day, every word Marcus had spoken, every expression on his face. I wrote about the fear I'd seen in Emma's eyes and the way she'd hesitated before defending me. I wrote about the pattern of behavior I'd been too blind to see before, the way Marcus had systematically isolated Emma from her support system, the way he'd made me feel unwelcome in their home, long before he'd said it out loud. Around noon, Emma called. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry about yesterday." Marcus was completely out of line. "Emma, sweetheart, you don't need to apologize for him, but I need you to know that what he did wasn't okay. It wasn't about being practical or having a family dinner. It was about humiliating me and putting me in my place." There was a long pause. Then Emma said very quietly, I know it wasn't okay. I've been thinking about it all night, and I know. Has he done things like this before?" Another pause. Not exactly like this, but he's always been controlling about who I can see, how often I can see them, what I can say to people. He says it's because he loves me and wants to protect our family, but sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating." My heart broke for her. "Oh, Emma, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was embarrassed. Because I didn't want to admit that I'd made a mistake. Because he's so good at making me feel like I'm the problem, like I'm being too sensitive or too dramatic." "You're not too sensitive, and you're not being dramatic. What he did yesterday was cruel and unacceptable, and I'm worried about you and Tyler. I confronted him about it after you left," Emma said. "He said he was just having a bad day, and that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. He said he was sorry, and that he'd apologize to you next time he saw you." "And do you believe him?" I want to believe that he's sorry, and that it won't happen again. But honestly, Mom, I don't know anymore. I don't know what to believe." We talked for another hour, and by the end of the conversation, I felt like like I'd gotten my daughter back. Not completely. She was still caught in Marcus's web of manipulation and control, but enough to know that she was starting to see the situation clearly. She was starting to understand that what was happening to her wasn't normal, wasn't healthy, wasn't love. I told her about the record I was keeping, about the importance of documenting everything in case she ever needed it. I told her about resources for women in abusive relationships, about counselors who specialized in helping people recognize and escape emotional abuse. I told her that I would always be there for her, no matter what she decided to do. But Emma, I said before we hung up, I need you to know that I can't put myself in that position again. I can't come to your house and subject myself to that kind of treatment. It's not healthy for me, and it's not healthy for Tyler to see his father treating his grandmother that way. I understand, she said. I wouldn't want you to put yourself through that again. That doesn't mean I'm abandoning you. It means I'm setting boundaries to protect myself while still being available to support you. We can meet at neutral location. You can come to my house. We can talk on the phone. But I won't be a guest in a home where the host thinks it's acceptable to treat me like hired help. 3 weeks later, Emma called me with news that both surprised and didn't surprise me. She'd found a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse and had started attending sessions. She had also started documenting Marcus's behavior, keeping a detailed record of his controlling actions and cruel words. I'm not ready to leave him yet, she told me. I'm still trying to figure out if this marriage can be saved, but I'm starting to understand that the problem isn't me. The problem is him. That conversation happened 6 months ago. Emma is still with Marcus, still trying to navigate life with a man who views kindness as weakness and control as love. But she's stronger now, more aware of what's happening to her. She's building her own support system, seeing a therapist regularly, and making plans for what she might do if things don't change. And me? I'm different too. That Sunday afternoon showed me that I'd been so focused on keeping the peace and being the perfect mother-in-law that I'd lost sight of my own worth and dignity. I'd allowed Marcus to treat me poorly for years because I didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to make things difficult for Emma. But I've learned that sometimes you have to rock the boat. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it might cause conflict. Because teaching people how to treat you isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about modeling healthy behavior for the people you love. I still see Tyler regularly, though never at Emma and Marcus's house. Emma brings him to my house for visits, or we meet at parks and restaurants. Tyler doesn't understand why we don't go to his house anymore, but he's young enough that he's adapted to the change without too much confusion. Marcus never did apologize to me, by the way. Emma mentioned it to him a few times, but he always found excuses to avoid it. I'm not surprised. Men like Marcus don't apologize because they don't think they've done anything wrong. In his mind, I'm still the meddling mother-in-law who got what she deserved. But that's okay. I don't need his apology anymore. I don't need his acceptance or approval. I don't need him to like me or welcome me into his home. What I need is to maintain my dignity, protect my emotional well-being, and be available to support my daughter when she's ready to accept it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's bad behavior, even when that someone is married to your daughter. Sometimes the most supportive thing you can do is model healthy boundary, even when it's difficult and painful. I'm still Emma's mother, and I always will be. I'm still Tyler's grandmother, and I always will be. But I'm also Linda, a woman with her own worth and dignity who deserves to be treated with respect. And I'll never again allow anyone to make me feel like I should be grateful for the crumbs of their attention or settle for eating in the kitchen while they feast at the table. That Sunday lunch changed everything, but in the end, maybe that's exactly what needed to happen.